Well, hey, everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to today's show. Now, in 2019, we saw one of the worst years on record for dengue worldwide. Numbers were up in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Well, joining me today to take a look at the past year in dengue, the progress with vaccines, and 2020 and beyond is Kamran Rafiq. Kamran is the co-founder and communications director for the International Society for Neglected Tropical Diseases, or the ISNTD. The ISNTD are spearheading a global campaign calling on the World Health Organization and the UN to ratify an official World Dengue Day. Hi, Kamran. Thanks for talking to me today.
Hello there, Robert. Thank you very much for making time for this. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and just start for listeners and viewers that may not be familiar, a little primer on dengue. What is it? How is it contracted? And how serious can it get?
Okay, so for those of you who have not heard of dengue or you're not familiar with it, dengue is a mosquito-borne viral infection. It was common in tropical climates. Infection is really caused by any one of the four very closely related dengue viruses, the serotypes. There are four different serotypes. They can lead to flu-like symptoms, quite a spectrum of symptoms, some of which are extremely mild, almost unnoticeable, but then it leads on, it can go on through that spectrum to symptoms that require medical intervention, fluid management, and hospitalization. In very severe cases, it can lead to dengue hemorrhagic fever, with a potentially fatal outcome, or dengue shock syndrome, which can also have a fatal outcome. So that's the kind of, it's the fastest growing mosquito-borne disease, vector-borne disease in the world. The situation, you've alluded to the 2019, this past year's explosive outbreak situation globally. We've seen a tripling and in some cases quadrupling of the incidence rates. And I think the backdrop to that, it's very interesting that in the late 1970s, we had a situation where 9 countries were presenting with dengue. When we moved to 2019, that's over 120 countries now. In fact, the latest estimate, 129 countries have presented with dengue. So it's been an absolute explosion in terms of the disease, so much so that the beginning of 2019, the United Nations, every January, as some of the listeners, I'm sure yourself, Robert, you know, that they put out a top 10 global health risk alert. Dengue was in that top 10 in January 2019, a year ago.
Well, Kamran, like I said in the intro, 2019 was an extremely bad year for dengue. Can we point to any specific reasons why 2019 was so bad?
I think there's been a lot of factors playing into this. I mean, one of the reasons that is often touted in terms of the situation of from the late 1970s to where we are now, i.e. the global spread, has been down to the lack of vector control capacity in countries. And that has resulted in increased breeding sites and increased mosquito populations. Another factor, which is now being looked at under peer review, and there's a lot of work going on in this, it's quite fashionable as well as a term, effects of climate change on vector ecology and vector distribution. So the two vectors, the two mosquitoes, Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, we're seeing a spread of those outside the traditional tropical climate. So 70% of the disease burden has been shouldered by Asia, as an example. However, in 2019, we've seen autochthonous cases, 9 of them in France, a few cases in Spain. We've seen this spread into Africa. We've seen this spread into, obviously, Latin America is having a huge outbreak. Brazil, Paraguay, as we speak, is going through a major outbreak. We've had outbreaks in the Caribbean this year, as well as Honduras. It's everywhere. and it's spreading because of the vector ecology, vector distribution, lowering or not enough investments being put into the vector control capacity side of things. Also, there are other compounding factors, and I mentioned Africa as an example. There is an issue of misdiagnosis, and then subsequently patient management, the treatment algorithms and treatment pathways that come from that misdiagnosis are resulting in, patients getting into dengue hemorrhagic fever. They're not being managed properly, they're misdiagnosed, not managed properly, going into dengue hemorrhagic fever. So there's quite a few, factors that are all coming together. Outside of that, you could even argue there's a migration of people, built environment issues. I know that the WHO, this year they put environmental management guidelines for solid waste management in terms of these kind of cryptic breeding sites where the mosquito just needs a very small amount of water to start breeding. So these things have to be managed in a holistic and integrated way. It's not just one reason, it's several reasons coming together.
Yeah. So a lot of countries saw record numbers of dengue in 2019. Is there any one particular outbreak that surprised you most?
Well, actually, yes. We sent in November in 2019, we sent our own journalists out to, from the International Society of Entities, we sent them out to Nepal. Very high altitude. I mean, it's the country that's the roof of the world. It's got, a lot of the Himalaya mountain range, very, very high mountains. They've had a dengue outbreak, and we interviewed the Ministry of Health there, and we put out that interview in November as part of our monthly digested newsletter that goes out globally in terms of dengue and part of our World Dengue advocacy project. We were very surprised with that. That's high altitude, so it obviously shows you that the mosquito populations are establishing themselves at high altitude. I say surprising because cities like Mexico City, as an example, that's been relatively spared by dengue. It's not really had an outbreak because of the altitude, whereas Nepal has had it. So is it just a matter of time that it gets to these higher altitudes? So that was quite a surprising part of last year. Yeah.
Okay, all right, Kamran, let's switch gears to the dengue vaccine. One vaccine was used in mass in the Philippines a couple of years ago that led to pretty bad outcomes. Can you discuss briefly for the listeners about what else is in the dengue vaccine pipeline as we speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll just like to say that before I say this, I'm not speaking on behalf of the manufacturer of these vaccines. It's something that we need. However, going on you had the WHO has put revised recommendations on the use of the existing vaccine by Sanofi Pasteur, Dengue Vaccine. Those include basically we have to know the sero status of the patients. So there's a need for a pre-diagnostic screening paradigm to be put in place. A seronegative patient receiving the vaccine would be at a higher risk of then going on to get dengue hemorrhagic fever. However, it's still recommended in highly endemic regions in terms of high seroprevalence of dengue. The WHO recommending it to use. It's highly efficacious, so it works. It offers good protection in terms of the patient, the child, going into dengue hemorrhagic fever when it's used in high prevalence settings. Just recently, to answer your question about the pipeline activity, that dengue vaccine was the first ever, as you know, vaccine for dengue. Takeda Pharmaceuticals, just at the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, I was there in Washington actually a few months ago, and they published their 18-month data. They'd already published their 13-month data there. They published their 18-month, looking very good. That is now very much on the event horizon. So there'll be 2 vaccines out there. And very interestingly, you've got Merck in the States have worked with the Butantan Institute of Brazil on an NIH, National Institute of Health vaccine candidate, which is some way off, but the early signs of that are some of the early kind of, not press releases, but I've been at the Asian Dengue Summit in Jakarta earlier, where Kathy Hoth from the MSD Butantan Initiative, they presented some of the findings for their work. It's looking very good. These two previous vaccines are triple and double shot, in terms of the vaccination, but the MSD one will be a single shot, and it's looking like the MSD one will be active across all 4 serotypes. Early to say, but that's the early indications. So there are 3 separate vaccines. There are also people working on small molecules, which seem to be, so Johnson & Johnson are working on a small molecule, as an example. And there are other players out there. So that NIH candidate that was given out as a license to be co-developed, the MSD Butantan that's looking very strong, but there are other groups in the world. So the Serum Institute in India, they're also developing that same candidate further. So there's like a lot of different activity going on around that NIH candidate. So it's looking very, very promising. Obviously, from an NTD perspective, some people might argue that dengue shouldn't be an NTD. One of the, it's still on the schedule, the WHO schedule has been from day one. One of the 4 criteria for an NTD is lack of R&D in this space. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of evolves as we move forward. 2 vaccines are here now. 1 is coming down the line, and you've got other mechanisms of actions that are looking at as well. So it's looking good. It's looking good.
Good. So we talked about 2019 and what a really bad year it was for dengue. Kamran, where do you see dengue in 2020 and beyond?
Well, there was a very interesting quote from the WHO regional director in the Western Pacific last year, where he was saying that dengue is here to stay. And one of the recommendations is that people in that particular area, the Western Pacific, Southeast Asia, that area, they need to view dengue as very much as we view seasonal flu. It's here to stay. And I dare say that the magnitude and severity of the outbreaks is not going to be decreasing anytime soon. It's very much going to be the part of the fabric of the lived experience of people in these areas. A very everyday kind of, it's something they have to live with. But to answer your question, moving forward, I think we've got to get a handle on this now. It's not going to diminish. It's going to get a lot worse.
Okay, well, let me go ahead and give you a chance to talk about the work of ISNTD, and something that your organization has been promoting is World Dengue Day. Kamran, why is this important, and where do you see this advocacy going?
Okay, so just to give you a very, very brief background, the International Society for NTDs, I'm one of the co-founders. We are involved, along with my colleague Marianne Comparator, two founders. We are involved in 2 things. One is resource capacity building through our members meetings that we have in London. We have about 5 different meetings a year. We've held them in Washington, for Chagas. We've held them in Portugal, and predominantly London. Resource capacity building. At the other end, we do sustained advocacy. So we put out landscaping reports on associated risk between female genital cysticercosis and HIV. We've put out epidemiological landscaping reports on mycetoma. This is before it was put onto the WHO NTD schedule. And part of our advocacy program is we wanted to really push for a politically ratified, politically accepted and backed World Dengue Day. At the moment, several countries, India is one of them, they have their own, Pakistan's another one, they have a dengue day or a dengue week nationally or provincially. And in the run-up to these days, and the most famous one is the ASEAN Secretariat-backed 15th of June Asian Dengue Day. Now, that's the biggest one. And these days are very, very useful because they provide an event horizon for all the various groups What we wanted to do was really decolonize that space from the optic of this is a vaccine-led approach. It's not. The vector control community has been making massive strides and gains in this area. The diagnostics world, you've got disease surveillance, you've got all sorts of different disciplines, and this is the age of multidisciplinary coming together. And we wanted to move it from a rhetorical position to provide an actual event horizon, so that all the various groups can have their own, are kind of engaged and empowered to have their own World Dengue Day. It might be in a school, a structured learning day in a school in Thailand, about the transmission cycle, about the preventative measures that are needed. It might be in a molecular diagnostics setting in terms of a lab somewhere. They might put on something. It might be, in a disease surveillance to induce a sense of citizen science. Just an event horizon we felt would be very, very useful, a focal point to motivate and to support all the various efforts. They've got something to aim at. And what we felt was, given that 70% of the global disease burden is shouldered by Asia, we went to the ASEAN Secretariat, the political body that represents all of the Southeast Asian countries, and we've got their backing. They've said that they'll back us, that what we're proposing is, we're not asking for another day in the development calendar. What we're saying is, let's boost the 15th of June from an Asian Dengue Day into a World Dengue Day. And we've got their backing. You mentioned the UN and the WHO. The mechanism that's been put in front of us is we have to have country requests that get put in at the Ministry of Health level by each country. They go into the executive board planning meeting of the WHO, which is actually from the 4th of February onwards in a few weeks. And then they will if they accept it, they will put forward a resolution for member states to vote on this day at the World Health Assembly in May in Geneva. That's the kind of pathway that we've got. Last year, we held our own dengue side meeting at the World Health Assembly in Geneva. We had a wonderful reception. All of that video of the sessions, we looked at climate change, community engagement, biocontrol, everything in association with dengue. All of those panel discussions and videos of the presentations are on our website for public consumption. They're there. We developed a media toolkit, which is downloadable with, I hate to use this word, but branding. So there's a world kind of, Dengue Day logo. There are infographics that can be used in school, explaining the spread of dengue, various tweet sheets where people can actually put out. We encourage social media interaction, so they're all ready for people to come out, facts and figures. Coming back to just to tie this answer into something you mentioned earlier, the vaccine, I think it's inescapable and it has to be talked about that all of this is against the vaccines, are against the world backdrop of vaccine hesitancy and mistrust. We're seeing a decrease in the uptake of vaccinations right across the board. And the Philippines is a very good example of a big misinformation war that's being waged, and actually a vacuum that was there from the HCP, the healthcare professional perspective. No one was really talking about that. It was just defined by the conspiracy theorists and the kind of thing. It's really paralyzed the dengue kind of community in terms of uptake of the vaccine. And that's another reason why we need the World Dengue Day. We need to counter any misinformation that's out there. As scientists, we need to step up to the plate, and having a World Dengue Day would, I think, really, provide that kind of focal point. So there are many, many reasons, but I'll kind of try to outline some of those for you. If you don't mind, we also have an additional effort where we set up a petition. So we had two petitions. One is for the technical community on our website, and we've got about 4,500 signatures from right across the world, institutes of parasitology, the vaccine world, the diagnostics world, big data, community. It's there. We've got those, and those names of people that have signed. Robert, you signed it as well, I believe, as well. We've seen it yet, so thank you for that. Those names are published on our website. That 4,500. But then in October, the middle of October, we put together. We had a 3-week period where we put together a digital strategy to bring the public in. So from the second week, so the middle of November last year, very recently, we launched the on change.org, a global public petition. And I'm very, very happy to say, I'm very proud to say, that from the middle of November to where we are now, you're talking about 10 weeks, we've amassed 12,000 signatures, and that is across 120 countries. That is from the lay public. And that's on change.org. We kept it independently held on a different platform, the change.org platform. And I can send you the links if you could flash those up. Would be very grateful for that. And I know you signed it as a mention, so that would be really useful. But what we're trying to say is, it's not just the technical community that are asking for a World Dengue Day, it's the public. And for us, that's the most important part of this equation, are the actual communities affected in their lives by dengue. And to further that, in the newsletter every month, it's part technical, so some very technical articles, some technical interviews, but at the same time, we have an outreach program where we go out and we bring in the lived experiences of the mothers, the fathers, the children, school teachers, the citizens, right? The people. What does dengue mean to you? How has it affected you? And some horrifying and very emotive stories have come out through the year. And I think it really humanizes this, the perception of dengue, but at the same time, it gives a human element to our World Dengue Day work. We're very proud of that, to give a voice to those people, to the people. So we're doing that as well. If any of your listeners have got any stories that they'd like to share, whether they're students, whether they've gone on holiday somewhere, whether they know someone directly, indirectly, absolutely feel free to share that with us. We'll publish it. We get it out every month. We've got a 35,000 readership of that particular dengue newsletter globally. It grows every month, and we want to put these stories out there. So we're really, we've given that extra bandwidth for that. So yeah, I hope that's answered your question. Yeah.
It sure does. Kamran, if somebody wants to find the ISNTD, do you have a website, social media? Where could they find you?
Okay, so we have a website, isntd.org, as in O-R-G, and then we also we have a Twitter feed, quite a large Twitter feed, ISNTD Press, LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, and also, so in London, if any of your listeners are in London, on March the 2nd or 3rd, we have our Science Communications Festival at the Wellcome Trust. We run it every year. This is the 5th year where we give out recognition awards. And Robert, I would strongly suggest you put in a submission, because your podcast and Outbreak News is heavily listened to. And it's one of the ones that a lot of people listen to. And we want to give it a bit of air, to be absolutely honest with you. I think you deserve that exposure.
Oh, thank you.
The topics, remit, the scope, it's fantastic. Very much needed. So I'll send you the link. Please have a look. If you're over in London, come over and give a speech on your podcast activities. I think it'll be very, very well received. So, we're London based. So if anyone's in the area, do that. I'll be in Malaysia for the ICID conference on the week of the 23rd of February. And I'm actually there with our film team. And we're making some emotive assets. So we're basically filming doctors in Malaysia who have had horrifying experiences with dengue. in terms of the patients they've had to treat, and we're trying to make a montage of their experiences to give it a bit of not just the technical information, but the actual emotive hit that HCPs are taking out in the field. So I'll be out there filming that in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. If anybody wants to meet us there, you're welcome to meet us. We'll be at the IC. I have a booth. We'll have a booth with a film team. So you're all welcome to be there. And if not, in London, 2nd and 3rd of March.
Well, excellent. We'll go ahead and post some of these links in the show notes page when I publish the podcast. And I want to thank you, Kamran Rafiq, for your time and your expertise, and I really appreciate it.
That's very, very kind of you, Robert. And I know it's 6 a.m., so I'm going to apologize where you are. I'm really here. It's Friday, 11:30. We've only got a few hours left before the weekend.
That's right.
I really appreciate you. You know, it's hats off to you, Robert. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.